talking about the powers of 10. Specifically, powers of 10 mean that when the number is a base of 10 being raised to a power. So in our first row that's been completed for us, we're going to talk about the different parts of it, and then we're going to fill in the rest of the chart there on our own. So the first thing we have is 10 to the negative second. Next, it wants me to write that as the reciprocal. The reciprocal is another way of saying the inverse of something. So the reciprocal of 10 to the negative second is 1 over 10 to the positive second. So when you write the reciprocal of a negative power, that's going to be written as 1 over a positive power. So 1 over 10 to the second. So now to write that as a fraction, I can see that since I have it raised to the power of 2, I'm going to have two fractions. So I've got one fraction here, and they are now both 1/10. So I'm going to do 1/10 times 1/10. So 1 times 1 is 1. 10 times 10 is 100, and that's how I get my fraction here, 1 over 100. Then I'm going to convert that to a decimal, and since I have 1 over 1/100ths, my 1 is in the hundredths place, and that's how I get the decimal form of this number. Now let's try in doing it on our own. So the next one I have is 10 to the negative fifth. So first I'm going to write that as a reciprocal. So since I have 10 to the negative fifth, I'm going to write that as 1 over 10 to the positive 5. Now I'm going to write that as a product of fractions. So since I have 5 1/10ths, or I'm going to be multiplying 1/10 times 1/10 times 1/10 times 1/10, 1 times 10. So I got 1/10, and I've got them multiplied 5 times. So when I do that, 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. And 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 gives me 100,000. So 1 over 100,000. And then I'm going to put that in the 100,000th place. So notice a good way to look at this is I've got 5 1/10ths since my power was to the 5th power. Underneath my fraction, I've got 5 zeros because I was going to the 5th power. And then when I'm going to my decimal, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. So all of them match up with 5. The key difference is that in the fraction, I have 5 zeros, and in the decimal, I have 5 spaces, not 5 zeros. So you have to remember that difference. But as long as you can see it's to the 5th power, you can say everything has to be to 5. So 5 zeros in the fraction, 5 decimal spaces in the decimal. Now let's look at the next row. In the next row, they've given me the reciprocal, and I have to fill in the rest. So I've got 1 over 10 to the third, and I know that that power is going to be 10 to the negative third. So if I'm writing it as the reciprocal, it's going to be 10 to the negative third. So now I'm going to write that as a product of fractions. So I'm going to have 10, or I've got 3 1/10ths, so 1/10 times 1/10 times 1/10. Then I can write that as a fraction. 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. So I have 1 1,000th. And then I'm going to write it as 1 1,000th as my decimal. Again, I've got 3 zeros there in my fraction, and I've got 3 spaces in my decimal, so that matches. Fantastic. Let's take a look at the next one. And in the next one, I've got 1/10 times 1/10, 1 times 1. So I got a lot of them. So let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've got 8 of them, so I know I'm going to have 10 to the negative 8th power. If I write that as a reciprocal, I've got 1 over 10 to the 8th. So now I've got 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, a lot of 1s. And then 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. If I don't want to do all of that, because it's going to be tough in my head, since I don't have my calculator, I can just count how many 1/10ths there are. And since there are 8 of them, I know I'm going to need 8 zeros, and I'm going to need 8 spaces in my decimal. So see, since I knew there were 8 of them, I could figure out, okay, I'm going to have 8 spaces in my zeros, 8 spaces in my decimal. So it's always good to figure out how many there are. You don't need to really do any math per se other than counting, and then you can figure out what number of spaces you need for your decimal and your fraction. I want you to try and fill in the rest of this chart here on your own. So you're going to pause the video now, you're going to fill in the rest of the chart, and then you're going to press play again to see if you are right. How did you do? Were you able to fill in the rest of the chart? Hopefully you noticed that there were 4 zeros in the first fraction, so you were able to know that was 10 to the negative 4th. And hopefully you knew there were 6 zeros in the last fraction, so that was 10 to the negative 6th. Now we have some notes to fill in there at the bottom. Remember the pattern. If it's a base 10, multiplying by 10 moves the decimal place 1 place to the right. Dividing by 10 is the same as multiplying by 1/10, as we talked about when we have all our 1/10ths up there. And in And in base 10, dividing by 10 moves the decimal point 1 point to the left. So this brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, go ahead and throw us a thumbs up. If you love this video, go ahead and throw us a sub, and we will catch you in the next one.